Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a time when winter wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential death sentence that visited every medieval village with mathematical precision. You're about to discover how families survived nights so brutally cold that frost formed on the inside walls of their homes, and where the difference between life and death often came down to who you chose to sleep next to. Picture yourself waking up in a small English village in 1350, and the first thing that hits you isn't daylight. It's the bone-deep cold that makes your modern heating bills seem like absolute luxury. Your breath forms little clouds inside your own bedroom, because medieval homes were basically elaborate tents made of mud sticks and wishful thinking. The temperature inside was maybe 5 degrees warmer than outside, which meant if it was 20 below zero out, their congratulations, you got to freeze to death at a toasty 15 below. But here's the thing that would absolutely blow your mind: people didn't just survive these conditions randomly. They developed sophisticated life or death strategies that turned every night into a carefully orchestrated survival operation. You probably won't survive this without central heating, but they did it year after year with nothing but human ingenuity and stubborn determination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And definitely drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see people falling asleep to medieval survival stories all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the village as winter tightens its grip, your feet crunching through snow that never seems to melt completely. The wind carries the sharp scent of wood smoke from dozens of chimneys, each one representing a family's desperate attempt to hold back the killing cold. Medieval winters weren't just harsh, they were brutal survival contests where entire bloodlines could be wiped out by a single miscalculation. The Little Ice Age had Europe in its merciless grip, bringing temperatures that regularly dropped 20 to 30 degrees below what we consider normal winter weather today. Rivers froze so solid that merchants held entire markets on the ice, complete with roasting fires and horse races. But while these frost fairs made for charming stories, the reality was that most families were fighting for survival in homes that offered barely more protection than a modern camping tent. Every cottage window was stuffed with whatever could block the wind-oiled parchment animal bladders, or just wooden shutters that turned homes into dark caves. The walls made of wattle and daub developed cracks that let in deadly draughts. You could literally see your neighbour's candlelight through the gaps in winter, assuming they could afford to keep a candle burning. Historians still argue whether medieval people were actually more cold-resistant than us, or if they simply had no choice but to endure conditions that would hospitalize modern humans within hours. What's certain is that they developed survival techniques that would impress any wilderness expert today. Techniques that meant the difference between waking up alive and becoming another winter statistic. The village around you settles into its winter rhythm, a community-wide choreography of survival, where every decision from where to sleep to who gets the warmest spot could mean life or death. You step through the massive oak doors of Lord Aldrich's manor and immediately understand why medieval nobles built their homes from stone, not for defense against armies, but for the brutal psychological warfare of trying to stay warm in what essentially amounts to a giant refrigerator made of rocks. The great hall stretches before you, like a cathedral of cold, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows where your breath mingles with the smoke from torches that provide more ambience than actual heat. Welcome to noble sleeping arrangements where having money meant you could afford to freeze to death in style. The Lord's family doesn't retreat to separate bedrooms like modern people. Instead, They create a complex human heating system right here in the hall, with sleeping positions determined by a strict hierarchy that literally puts the most important people in the warmest spots. Picture the scene as evening approaches. Servants drag heavy wooden platforms near the central hearth, creating an elaborate sleeping arrangement that looks like a medieval slumber party designed by someone with serious trust issues. The lord and his wife claim the spot closest to the fire naturally, but they're surrounded by a carefully orchestrated constellation of family members, trusted servants, and even a few favoured hunting dogs who've earned their place through loyal service and superior body heat production. The curious thing about Great Hall sleeping is how it reveals the medieval understanding that surviving winter required abandoning modern concepts of privacy. You've got the Lord's teenage son sleeping 3 feet from his parents' maiden aunts, curled up with kitchen servants, and everyone pretending this cramped arrangement is perfectly dignified. Social status determined how close you got to the fire, but everyone benefited from the collective body heat of 30-plus people crammed into one space. Servants spread thick rushes on the stone floor, creating a natural insulation layer that also absorbed the various bodily fluids that inevitably accompany communal sleeping. These weren't decorative, they were survival equipment. The rushes trapped air, creating a barrier between human bodies and stones that could literally suck the life out of you through conductive heat loss. Fresh rushes were brought in weekly during winter, not for cleanliness, but because compressed plant matter lost its insulating properties. But here's where it gets fascinating. The nobles developed specific protocols for nighttime survival that reveal just how serious this business was. Younger servants who generated the most body heat were strategically positioned around older family members. Pregnant women and small children got priority spots near the fire. Even the family cats earned their keep by serving as living hot water bottles for arthritic grandparents who couldn't generate enough heat to survive the night alone. The hearth itself never truly died. Maintaining that fire was literally a life or death responsibility assigned to the most trusted servants. They'd bank the coals with ash to create a slow, steady burn that lasted through the night, because starting a fire from scratch in medieval times could take an hour of focused effort with flint and tinder. Lose that fire, and you might lose family members before dawn. Medieval chronicles record instances where entire noble households were found frozen in their great halls after fires died during particularly brutal nights. One account from 1348 describes a Yorkshire manor where Lord Geoffrey's family was discovered stiff as statues round their cold hearth, victims of a winter storm that extinguished their fire while they slept. These weren't isolated incidents. They were recurring reminders that even wealth couldn't guarantee survival against medieval winter. But the sleeping arrangements also revealed fascinating social dynamics. Kitchen maids might find themselves curled up next to duchesses sharing body heat without regard for normal class distinctions. War veterans slept beside choir boys, elderly chaplains nestled against stable hands. Winter was the great equalizer that temporarily suspended social hierarchies in favour of biological necessity. Some nobles tried to maintain dignity by installing heavy bed curtains around their sleeping areas, creating private spaces within the communal arrangement, but these curtains often proved counterproductive, trapping cold air and preventing the circulation of warmth from the fire and other bodies. Smart noble families learned to choose survival over propriety. Historians still argue whether this communal sleeping was primarily about warmth or security, but surviving household records suggest medieval nobles understood something. We've forgotten that survival often requires sacrificing individual comfort for collective safety. The account books of various manors detail payments for extra rushes, additional firewood, and even rewards for servants who successfully maintained fires through particularly dangerous nights. You settle into your imagined spot on the rushes, feeling the stone floor's cold seeping through the plant matter despite its thickness. Around you, 30 people breathe, snore, and shift in the darkness. The fire pops and settles, casting dancing shadows on walls decorated with tapestries that provide more insulation than beauty. Somewhere in the shadows, a baby whimpers and is quickly hushed by its mother. A hunting hound stretches and readjusts its warm fur, brushing against your leg. This isn't sleeping. It's a carefully orchestrated survival ritual performed every single night, where the difference between life and death often came down to your position in an elaborate human heating system that turned medieval nobility into the world's most aristocratic pile of people. You push open the creaking door of Thomas Fletcher's cottage and step into a world where architectural genius meets desperate necessity. This single room, barely 12 feet square, represents the pinnacle of peasant survival engineering, a carefully designed thermal system disguised as humble living quarters. Every inch of space serves multiple purposes, and every family member functions as both heater and heated in an intricate dance of survival that would make modern efficiency experts weep with envy. The cottage looks chaotic to your modern eyes, but you're witnessing something remarkable, a perfectly optimized survival machine where nothing exists without purpose. The family's sleeping area occupies the corner farthest from the door, positioned to capture maximum heat from the central hearth, while staying protected from deadly drafts that slip through gaps in the wattle and daub walls. This isn't random placement. It's the result of generations of trial and error where families who chose poorly didn't survive to pass along their mistakes. Thomas has arranged thick bundles of straw against the exterior walls, creating an insulation barrier that adds precious degrees of warmth while also serving as emergency food for their livestock. The straw isn't just stuffing, it's a complex system of trapped air pockets that prevents the stone foundation from conducting heat directly out of their bodies. Medieval peasants understood thermal dynamics in ways that would impress modern engineers, even if they couldn't explain the science behind their techniques. The sleeping arrangements reveal the sophisticated understanding medieval families had about heat distribution and body positioning. Thomas and his wife Emma claim the centre of the shared sleeping area, not because they're selfish, but because their adult bodies generate the most consistent heat throughout the night. Their teenage son William sleeps on Thomas's right side, positioned to benefit from his father's warmth, while contributing his own youthful heat production. Little Agnes, their 6-year-old daughter, sleeps between her parents like a human hot water bottle, her small body absorbing heat from both sides, while her rapid metabolism keeps her internal furnace burning bright. But the real genius lies in the vertical sleeping arrangement. The family doesn't just lie flat on their straw mattress, they create a complex system of overlapping bodies and shared coverings that maximizes heat retention. Emma sleeps partially on top of Thomas's left arm, using his body as a heat source, while her own body helps warm his torso. William curls around his father's legs, and little Agnes fits into the space between her mother's arm and chest, creating what modern survival experts would recognize as perfect heat-sharing positions. The cottage's livestock aren't just farm animals, they're integrated components of the heating system. 2 goats sleep in a small pen built directly into the cottage's interior, their bodies raising the overall temperature by several crucial degrees. The family's 3 chickens roost on a shelf above the goats, their feathers providing insulation while their bodies contribute additional warmth. Even the family dog, a scraggly terrier named Biscuit, earns his keep by sleeping across the feet of whoever needs extra warmth on particularly brutal nights. Medieval peasants developed specific protocols for nighttime positioning, that revealed just how precisely they understood body heat dynamics. Pregnant women slept in the center of family clusters surrounded by other bodies to keep their internal temperature stable. Elderly grandparents were positioned near the heartiest young adults who could provide steady warmth throughout the night. Sick family members received priority placement near the fire, with healthy relatives forming human heat shields around them. The cottage's design incorporates dozens of thermal efficiency features that modern people would never notice. The sleeping platform sits 18 inches off the ground, preventing ground cold from seeping into the mattress. Small niches carved into the walls hold warmed stones wrapped in cloth medieval hot water bottles that provided hours of localized heat. Even the chamber pot's position serves thermal purposes, placed where its contents won't freeze solid and create additional cold spots in the small space. Historians still argue whether peasant families were more cold-tolerant than modern people, or if they simply developed superior survival techniques through necessity. What's certain is that cottage sleeping arrangements represented centuries of accumulated wisdom about human thermal management. Families who failed to master these techniques didn't survive to reproduce, creating a natural selection pressure that favoured those who understood the art of staying warm together. You settle into your imagined spot in the Fletcher family arrangement, feeling the straw mattress rustle beneath shared blankets, made from whatever fabric the family could acquire, rough wool patched linen, and even repurposed grain sacks. The walls around you breathe with cold air, but the carefully positioned bodies create a warm microclimate that makes survival possible. Outside, wind howls through bare trees, but inside this ingenious thermal machine, a peasant family prepares to survive another winter night, through nothing more sophisticated than human cooperation and centuries of hard-won survival wisdom. You crouch down beside little Agnes Fletcher as she demonstrates the most crucial survival skill any medieval child could possess, the art of becoming a human radiator. At 6 years old, she's already a master of thermal engineering, instinctively curling her small body into the spaces between adults, where her rapid metabolism and compact size make her the family's most efficient heat generator. Medieval children weren't just protected during winter nights, they were strategic weapons in the war against freezing to death. The science behind using children as living heaters would fascinate modern physiologists. Small bodies have higher metabolic rates per pound than adults, meaning they generate more heat relative to their size. Their compact frames lose heat more slowly than adult bodies, and their natural tendency to curl up in tight positions creates perfect heat retention postures. Medieval families understood this instinctively, positioning their smallest members like tiny furnaces in the gaps where adult bodies couldn't quite reach. But here's the fascinating part that reveals just how sophisticated medieval thermal management really was. Children rotated positions throughout the night, based on a complex system of need and body temperature. Agnes starts the evening nestled between her parents' torsos, her small back pressed against her mother's chest, while her face breathes warmth from her father's neck. Around midnight, when adult body temperatures naturally drop, she'll migrate to her teenage brother William's side, where his adolescent metabolism provides a fresh source of heat. The positioning isn't random, it's based on centuries of survival wisdom passed down through families who lived or died by their ability to share warmth effectively. Agnes sleeps on her side in a fetal position that minimizes surface area exposed to cold air. Her knees draw up to her chest, her arms fold across her torso, and even her hands tuck under her armpits to prevent fingers from developing deadly frostbite while she sleeps. Medieval parents developed specific techniques for using their children's body heat that would impress modern survival experts. Mothers like Emma learned to position infants against their bare skin under shared clothing, creating perfect skin-to-skin contact that kept babies alive through temperatures that would kill them within hours if left alone. Fathers tucked toddlers under their tunics using their chest and back warmth to maintain their children's core temperatures throughout the night. The most remarkable aspect of this system was how children learned to participate actively in family survival. Agnes knows to wake up if she becomes too cold, alerting her parents that the thermal system needs adjustment. She's trained to recognize when adults around her are getting dangerously cold, pressing her warm little body against their torsos to provide life-saving heat. By age 4, medieval children could literally save adult lives through strategic cuddling. Medieval chronicles record heartbreaking instances where families lost children not to cold, but to the desperate attempts to keep adults alive. During the brutal winter of 1315, surviving accounts describe parents who position their children as human shields against the cold, sometimes smothering them accidentally in their desperation to maintain warmth. These tragedies led to the development of more sophisticated positioning techniques that protected children while still utilizing their heat-generating capabilities. But children weren't just heat sources, they were also heat preservers. Their small bodies fit into spaces where cold air might otherwise circulate, plugging gaps in the family's thermal defense system. Agnes can curl up in the space between her father's bent knees, preventing cold air from flowing across his legs. Her brother William learned to sleep with his younger sister's feet tucked under his back, keeping her extremities warm while adding an extra layer of insulation to his own torso. The psychological dynamics of using children as heaters created unique family bonds that modern people struggle to understand. Medieval parents didn't see this as exploitation. They saw it as training their children in the survival skills they'd need as adults. Children who mastered the art of strategic warmth. Sharing were more likely to survive to adulthood and successfully raise their own families. Medieval families developed specific protocols for protecting their smallest heat generators. Children received the first portions of warming foods like hot porridge or heated wine mixed with honey. They were wrapped in the softest available furs or fabrics, not for comfort, but because rough materials could cause cuts that would lead to heat loss. Even their sleeping positions were carefully monitored to ensure they could breathe freely, while maintaining maximum thermal contact with adult bodies. Historians still argue whether medieval childhood mortality rates were affected by these thermal survival techniques, but surviving records suggest that families who mastered the art of using children as living heaters had higher survival rates overall. The techniques required perfect balance. Too much reliance on child body heat could endanger the children, while too little meant adult family members might not survive. You watch little Agnes settle into her nighttime position, her small body automatically finding the warmest available space, while her presence raises the temperature for everyone around her. She's not just a child, she's a crucial component in a survival system that turns family love into literal life-saving warmth, where the smallest bodies carry the greatest responsibility for keeping everyone alive until dawn. You follow Thomas Fletcher to the small lean-to attached to his cottage, where Buttercup the goat and Matilda the sow have already settled in for the night, and you realize you're about to witness one of medieval survival's most intimate secrets, the art of interspecies sleeping that turned barnyard animals into life-saving bedmates. This isn't about desperation or poverty. It's about sophisticated thermal engineering that recognized animals as superior heating systems with built-in thermostats and unlimited fuel supplies. Medieval families didn't just tolerate sleeping with livestock, they actively cultivated relationships with animals based on their heat-generating potential. Goats were prized not just for their milk, but because their compact bodies produced steady warmth throughout the night, while their thick coats created natural insulation barriers. Pigs, despite their reputation, were actually excellent sleeping companions because their large body mass generated substantial heat, and their surprisingly clean sleeping habits made them preferable to many other options. The science behind animal bedmates would fascinate modern thermodynamics experts. A medium-sized goat produces roughly the same amount of body heat as an adult human, but with better temperature regulation, and none of the heat loss that comes from human anxiety about freezing to death. Animals naturally maintain their core body temperatures through involuntary shivering and metabolic adjustments, creating steady heat sources that never panic, never lose sleep, and never stop generating warmth. But here's where medieval animal management gets truly brilliant. Families selected their bedmate animals based on specific thermal characteristics that took years to identify and develop. Buttercup wasn't chosen randomly. She was selected from dozens of goats because she had the perfect combination of heat production, calm temperament, and sleeping habits that complemented human thermal needs. She naturally curls up in positions that maximize heat sharing, doesn't kick during sleep, and instinctively moves closer to humans when temperatures drop. The positioning of animal bedmates followed sophisticated protocols that revealed just how precisely medieval families understood heat transfer. Goats like Buttercup sleep pressed against human backs, providing steady warmth to the torso, while their legs generate heat for human feet. Pigs position themselves along the edges of sleeping areas, creating windbreaks that prevent cold air circulation, while their massive bodies radiate heat upward toward human sleeping surfaces. Medieval families developed specific training techniques for their animal bedmates that would impress modern animal behaviorists. Young goats were taught to sleep in human contact from birth, creating psychological bonds that made them seek out human warmth instinctively. Pigs learned to respond to verbal commands that directed them to specific positions based on changing temperature conditions throughout the night. The most remarkable aspect of this system was how animals learned to participate actively in family thermal management. Buttercup wakes up when humans around her start shivering, automatically pressing closer to provide additional warmth. She's learned to recognize the breathing patterns that indicate someone is getting dangerously cold, positioning her warm belly against their back or legs to provide life-saving heat transfer. Medieval chronicles record fascinating instances where animals literally saved human lives through their thermal assistance. During the devastating winter of 1348, a surviving account describes a family in Yorkshire who survived because their sow somehow sensed that the father was developing hypothermia and spent the entire night pressed against his torso, maintaining his core body temperature until dawn. The man recovered completely, crediting the pig with saving his life. But animal bedmates weren't just heat sources, they were also early warning systems for dangerous temperature drops. Animals have more sensitive temperature perception than humans, and they often began shivering or seeking additional warmth before their human companions realized the danger. Smart medieval families learned to watch their animals for signs that thermal conditions were becoming life-threatening. The logistics of sleeping with livestock required careful management that reveals the sophisticated understanding medieval families had about animal behavior and hygiene. Animals were brushed clean before nighttime positioning to remove dirt and parasites that could cause problems during extended human contact. Their sleeping areas were layered with fresh straw that absorbed waste while providing additional insulation. Even their diets were adjusted to maximize heat production. Animals fed warming grains like oats generated more body heat than those eating cold foods. Medieval families developed specific protocols for managing their animal heating systems that balanced human survival needs with animal welfare. Pregnant animals received priority positioning because their metabolic demands made them generate even more heat than usual. Sick animals were temporarily replaced in sleeping arrangements to prevent disease transmission, but were kept in the same space to maintain overall thermal contributions. Historians still argue whether medieval people formed genuine emotional bonds with their animal bedmates, or if these were purely utilitarian relationships based on survival necessity. Surviving accounts suggest both elements existed. Families clearly cared for animals that had saved their lives through warmth sharing, while also understanding that these relationships were literally matters of life and death. You settle down beside Buttercup in your imagined medieval sleeping arrangement, feeling her warm flank against your back, while her steady breathing creates a rhythm that somehow makes the cold night seem less threatening. Her thick coat tickles your neck, and you realize that this goat isn't just livestock. She's a trusted partner in the ancient art of surviving winter through the simple magic of shared warmth between species. You settle into the Fletcher family's evening routine as the sun disappears and darkness brings the first challenge of medieval winter survival, mastering the ancient art of segmented sleep that turned 14-hour nights into manageable survival intervals. This wasn't the uninterrupted 8-hour sleep cycle you're used to. This was a sophisticated two-phase system that medieval people called first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful period in between that served crucial survival functions you'd never imagine. The segmented sleep pattern wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was biological adaptation to staying alive through the longest, coldest nights in human history. Medieval families went to bed shortly after sunset around 6 in the evening, because candles were expensive and darkness meant conserving precious fuel resources. But they didn't sleep straight through until dawn like modern people attempt to do. Instead, they slept deeply for about 4 hours, then naturally awakened for 1 to 3 hours of quiet activity, before settling into their second sleep that lasted until sunrise. This wakeful period between sleeps wasn't considered insomnia, it was called the watching time, and it served essential survival functions that kept families alive through winter nights. During these midnight hours, someone always checked the fire to ensure it hadn't died, adjusted clothing and coverings that had shifted during sleep, and monitored family members for signs of dangerous cold exposure. Medieval people used this time for quiet activities that generated gentle warmth without fully awakening everyone else. But here's the fascinating part that reveals just how perfectly this sleep system was adapted to winter survival. The human body naturally produces its lowest core temperatures between 2 and 4 in the morning. Medieval families learned to combat this dangerous thermal dip by timing their wakeful period to coincide with their most vulnerable hours. During the watching time, they could add layers of clothing, reposition themselves for better heat sharing, or consume warming foods that would carry them safely through their coldest biological period. The activities during watching time were carefully chosen to promote warmth without causing dangerous sweating that could lead to deadly heat loss. Couples engaged in gentle intimacy that raised body temperatures naturally. Parents checked on children, adjusting their positions or adding coverings as needed. Family members shared warm drinks made from heated wine, honey, and herbs that provided both calories and thermal benefits that lasted for hours. Medieval people also used watching time for spiritual activities that served psychological survival functions. Families recited prayers together in whispered voices, sharing religious comfort that helped manage the anxiety of not knowing if everyone would survive until dawn. They told quiet stories that maintained family bonds while keeping minds occupied during the most dangerous hours of the night. The transition back into second sleep required specific techniques that medieval families perfected through generations of winter survival. Bodies were repositioned to maximize heat sharing for the remaining hours before dawn. Warming stones that had cooled during first sleep were replaced with freshly heated ones. Even breathing techniques were adjusted. Families learned to synchronize their breathing patterns during second sleep, creating shared warmth through coordinated airflow. Medieval chronicles record fascinating details about how different social classes adapted the segmented sleep pattern to their specific survival needs. Noble families used watching time for private conversations about estate management and family concerns that couldn't be discussed in front of servants during daylight hours. Peasant families used these midnight hours for intimate discussions about survival strategies, resource management, and plans for making it through winter. But the most remarkable aspect of segmented sleep was how it created opportunities for activities that were impossible during daylight hours. Medieval people used watching time for creative pursuits that generated gentle warmth. Women worked on intricate needlework by firelight, men carved wood, or repaired tools, and families shared stories and songs that strengthened social bonds while keeping bodies active enough to maintain warmth. The biological benefits of this sleep pattern would fascinate modern sleep researchers. The natural awakening after 4 hours coincided with the completion of several full sleep cycles, leaving people refreshed rather than groggy. The period of wakefulness allowed stress hormones to reset, preventing the anxiety buildup that could lead to panic about survival. The return to second sleep was often deeper and more restorative than the first phase, preparing bodies for the physical demands of winter survival. Medieval families developed specific protocols for managing segmented sleep that balanced individual needs with family survival requirements. Children were often allowed to sleep through both phases if their body heat wasn't critically needed during watching time. Elderly family members sometimes stayed awake during the entire watching period, serving as fire tenders and safety monitors, while younger adults returned to sleep. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was purely an adaptation to medieval lighting conditions, or if it represented a more natural human sleep pattern that modern artificial lighting has disrupted. What's certain is that medieval families who mastered this two-phase system had higher winter survival rates than those who tried to sleep continuously through 14-hour nights. You experience your own watching time in the Fletcher cottage, feeling the shift in consciousness as your body naturally awakens after 4 hours of deep sleep. Around you, family members stir quietly, checking the fire, adjusting blankets, whispering gentle conversations that somehow make the infinite darkness seem less threatening. This isn't broken sleep, it's perfectly orchestrated survival that turns the longest winter nights into manageable intervals of rest, vigilance, and shared warmth. You watch Emma Fletcher begin her family's evening clothing ritual and realize you're witnessing something that would horrify modern hygiene experts: the deliberate art of sleeping fully dressed in multiple layers of wool linen, and whatever fabric could trap precious body heat through the deadly hours until dawn. Medieval people didn't change into pajamas because pajamas were an invitation to freeze to death. Instead, they transformed bedtime into strategic insulation planning that turned the human body into a walking thermal survival system. The process begins hours before actual sleep, as family members start adding layers in a specific sequence that medieval wisdom had perfected through centuries of trial and error. Emma begins with her linen chemise, the base layer that absorbs moisture, while providing a barrier between skin and the rougher wool garments that will trap her body heat. Over this goes her woolen kirtle, then a heavy overgown, and finally her thick winter cloak that doubles as both outer garment and blanket throughout the night. But here's where medieval clothing strategy gets truly sophisticated. Each layer serves a different thermal function that reveals an understanding of heat transfer that would impress modern outdoor survival experts. The linen base layer wicks moisture away from skin, preventing the deadly heat loss that occurs when sweat freezes against the body. The wool middle layers create air pockets that trap warm air, while allowing enough circulation to prevent dangerous overheating that could lead to sweating and subsequent hypothermia. Thomas adds his own layers with the methodical precision of someone who understands that clothing choices can mean the difference between waking up alive or not waking up at all. His woolen braize serve as insulated undergarments. His linen shirt provides the moisture barrier, his woolen tunic traps heat around his torso, and his heavy cloak creates an outer shell that seals the entire system. By the time he's ready for sleep, he's wearing roughly 15 pounds of clothing that transforms him into a human thermos. The children's clothing systems reveal just how precisely medieval families understood the thermal needs of different body types. Little Agnes wears specially adapted garments that can expand as she curls into heat-preserving positions while still maintaining insulation coverage. Her woolen stockings extend all the way up her legs under her chemise, creating seamless thermal protection that prevents dangerous heat loss at vulnerable joint areas like knees and ankles. Medieval families developed specific techniques for managing fully clothed sleep that balanced thermal protection with comfort and mobility. Sleeves were designed to be tucked inside each other, creating layered insulation for arms while preventing gaps that could admit cold air. Hems were weighted with small stones or metal pieces that kept garments positioned properly during sleep, preventing dangerous exposure of skin that could lead to frostbite. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval sleep clothing was how it incorporated removable heating elements that could be adjusted throughout the night. Emma's cloak contains hidden pockets where heated stones wrapped in cloth can be positioned against her torso, back or feet as needed. Thomas's tunic has specially designed openings that allow warm objects to be inserted against his chest without disturbing the overall thermal integrity of his layered system. The logistics of sleeping in full winter clothing required careful management that modern people would find claustrophobic and impossible. Medieval families learned to sleep in positions that prevented clothing from bunching up in ways that created cold spots or circulation problems. They developed techniques for adjusting layers during the night without exposing skin to deadly air temperatures, essentially changing clothes under blankets in complete darkness. Medieval chronicles record fascinating details about how clothing choices affected winter survival rates. During the brutal winter of 1348, surviving accounts describe families where some members died, while others survived, with clothing differences being the determining factor. Those who wore properly layered wool systems lived, while those who tried to sleep in lighter garments or removed clothing during the night were found frozen by morning. The social implications of sleeping fully clothed reveal interesting aspects of medieval family dynamics. Privacy was impossible when everyone slept in multiple layers of clothing that couldn't be easily removed, creating a culture where physical intimacy required careful planning and strategic clothing design. Married couples developed techniques for maintaining physical closeness while both wearing full thermal protection systems. Medieval families also developed specific protocols for managing clothing maintenance that balanced thermal protection needs with hygiene and durability concerns. Outer layers were brushed clean and aired when possible, but inner layers remained on bodies for weeks or months during the coldest periods. This wasn't poor hygiene, it was survival strategy that recognized removing base layers could prove fatal if they couldn't be adequately warmed before being put back on. The morning clothing routine was as carefully orchestrated as the evening preparation. Medieval families learned to assess which layers could be safely removed based on indoor temperature conditions, and which needed to remain in place until fires had raised ambient temperatures to survivable levels. Removing clothing too quickly after a cold night could cause dangerous thermal shock that led to illness or death. Historians still argue whether medieval people were genuinely comfortable sleeping in full clothing systems, or if they simply endured the discomfort as a survival necessity. Surviving personal accounts suggest that families who mastered the art of layered sleep clothing actually found it comforting rather than restrictive, creating a cocoon-like environment that provided psychological security along with thermal protection. You settle into your imagined medieval sleep system, feeling the weight and bulk of multiple clothing layers that transform your body into an insulated survival capsule. The wool scratches slightly against your skin, but the trapped warmth makes you understand why medieval people chose strategic discomfort over the elegant simplicity of freezing to death in lighter garments. You watch Emma Fletcher begin her family's evening clothing ritual and realize you're witnessing something that would horrify modern hygiene experts: the deliberate art of sleeping fully dressed in multiple layers of wool linen and whatever fabric could trap precious body heat through the deadly hours until dawn. Medieval people didn't change into pajamas because pajamas were an invitation to freeze to death. Instead, they transformed bedtime into strategic insulation planning that turned the human body into a walking thermal survival system. The process begins hours before actual sleep, as family members start adding layers in a specific sequence that medieval wisdom had perfected through centuries of trial and error. Emma begins with her linen chemise, the base layer that absorbs moisture, while providing a barrier between skin and the rougher wool garments that will trap her body heat. Over this goes her woolen kirtle, then her heavy overgown, and finally her thick winter cloak that doubles as both outer garment and blanket throughout the night. But here's where medieval clothing strategy gets truly sophisticated. Each layer serves a different thermal function that reveals an understanding of heat transfer that would impress modern outdoor survival experts. The linen base layer wicks moisture away from skin, preventing the deadly heat loss that occurs when sweat freezes against the body. The wool middle layers create air pockets that trap warm air while allowing enough circulation to prevent dangerous overheating that could lead to sweating and subsequent hypothermia. Thomas adds his own layers with the methodical precision of someone who understands that clothing choices can mean the difference between waking up alive or not waking up at all. His woolen braids serve as insulated undergarments. His linen shirt provides the moisture barrier. His woolen tunic traps heat around his torso, and his heavy cloak creates an outer shell that seals the entire system. By the time he's ready for sleep, he's wearing roughly 15 pounds of clothing that transforms him into a human thermos. The children's clothing systems reveal just how precisely medieval families understood the thermal needs of different body types. Little Agnes wears specially adapted garments that can expand as she curls into heat-preserving positions while still maintaining insulation coverage. Her woolen stockings extend all the way up her legs under her chemise, creating seamless thermal protection that prevents dangerous heat loss at vulnerable joint areas like knees and ankles. Medieval families developed specific techniques for managing fully clothed sleep that balanced thermal protection with comfort and mobility. Sleeves were designed to be tucked inside each other, creating layered insulation for arms while preventing gaps that could admit cold air. Hems were weighted with small stones or metal pieces that kept garments positioned properly during sleep, preventing dangerous exposure of skin that could lead to frostbite. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval sleep clothing was how it incorporated removable heating elements that could be adjusted throughout the night. Emma's cloak contains hidden pockets where heated stones wrapped in cloth can be positioned against her torso, back, or feet as needed. Thomas's tunic has specially designed openings that allow warm objects to be inserted against his chest without disturbing the overall thermal integrity of his layered system. The logistics of sleeping in full winter clothing required careful management that modern people would find claustrophobic and impossible. Medieval families learned to sleep in positions that prevented clothing from bunching up in ways that created cold spots or circulation problems. They developed techniques for adjusting layers during the night without exposing skin to deadly air temperatures, essentially changing clothes under blankets in complete darkness. Medieval chronicles record fascinating details about how clothing choices affected winter survival rates. During the brutal winter of 1348, surviving accounts described families where some members died, while others survived with clothing differences being the determining factor. Those who wore properly layered wool systems lived, while those who tried to sleep in lighter garments or removed clothing during the night were found frozen by morning. The social implications of sleeping fully clothed reveal interesting aspects of medieval family dynamics. Privacy was impossible when everyone slept in multiple layers of clothing that couldn't be easily removed, creating a culture where physical intimacy required careful planning and strategic clothing design. Married couples developed techniques for maintaining physical closeness, while both wearing full thermal protection systems. Medieval families also developed specific protocols for managing clothing maintenance that balanced thermal protection needs with hygiene and durability concerns. Outer layers were brushed clean and aired when possible, but inner layers remained on bodies for weeks or months during the coldest periods. This wasn't poor hygiene, it was survival strategy that recognized removing base layers could prove fatal if they couldn't be adequately warmed before being put back on. The morning clothing routine was as carefully orchestrated as the evening preparation. Medieval families learned to assess which layers could be safely removed based on indoor temperature conditions, and which needed to remain in place until fires had raised ambient temperatures to survivable levels. Removing clothing too quickly after a cold night could cause dangerous thermal shock that led to illness or death. Historians still argue whether medieval people were genuinely comfortable sleeping in full clothing systems, or if they simply endured the discomfort as a survival necessity. Surviving personal accounts suggest that families who mastered the art of layered sleep clothing actually found it comforting rather than restrictive, creating a cocoon-like environment that provided psychological security along with thermal protection. You settle into your imagined medieval sleep system, feeling the weight and bulk of multiple clothing layers that transform your body into an insulated survival capsule. The wool scratches slightly against your skin, but the trapped warmth makes you understand why medieval people chose strategic discomfort over the elegant simplicity of freezing to death in lighter garments. You help Thomas Fletcher gather armfuls of straw from the barn and realize you're about to learn the sophisticated engineering principles behind medieval mattress construction, a complex thermal system that required daily maintenance, strategic layering, and an understanding of organic insulation that would impress modern materials scientists. This isn't just bedding, it's a carefully designed heat retention apparatus that could mean the difference between sleeping warmly and waking up dead. The foundation of every medieval sleeping system starts with the straw selection process, which reveals knowledge about plant materials that took generations to perfect. Thomas doesn't grab random straw. He carefully selects stalks based on their thermal properties, age, and condition. Fresh wheat straw provides the best insulation because its hollow stems trap air efficiently while remaining springy enough to maintain loft throughout the night. Older straw compresses too easily, creating cold spots where bodies sink through the insulation barrier. But here's where medieval bedding engineering gets truly brilliant. The straw isn't just thrown into a sack and called a mattress. Thomas creates a complex layered system that manages both insulation and moisture control simultaneously. The bottom layer consists of coarser straw mixed with dried rushes, creating a foundation that elevates the sleeping surface while allowing air circulation that prevents deadly moisture buildup that could freeze and conduct heat away from sleeping bodies. The middle layer represents the heart of medieval thermal engineering, carefully sorted straw arranged in alternating directions to create maximum air trapping potential, while preventing compression that would eliminate insulation properties. Thomas arranges the stalks so that air pockets form throughout the mattress, essentially creating a medieval version of modern down insulation that maintains loft even under the weight of multiple bodies. The top layer reveals the sophisticated understanding medieval families had about surface comfort and heat retention. Fine straw mixed with dried herbs serves multiple functions. It provides a smoother sleeping surface that won't poke through fabric coverings, while herbs like lavender and thyme contain natural oils that help repel insects and provide subtle aromatherapy that promotes restful sleep during stressful survival situations. Medieval families developed specific maintenance protocols for their straw systems that balance thermal efficiency with practical durability. Every morning, Thomas fluffs and redistributes the straw to restore its insulating properties after being compressed by sleeping bodies. Straw that has lost its spring gets replaced with fresh material because compressed straw conducts heat rather than trapping it, turning your bed into a heat-sucking device that could kill you. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval mattress engineering was how different family members required different straw configurations based on their individual thermal needs. Little Agnes gets a mattress with finer, softer straw that conforms to her small body, while providing maximum insulation around her high surface area to volume ratio. Thomas and Emma share a firmer straw base that supports their adult weight, while maintaining air pockets that trap their greater heat production. The science behind straw insulation would fascinate modern thermal engineers. Each hollow straw stem creates a tiny air chamber that resists heat transfer, while the random orientation of multiple stems creates a complex matrix of trapped air spaces. When properly maintained, a good straw mattress could provide insulation equivalent to several inches of modern foam, but with the advantage of being completely renewable and locally sourced. Medieval chronicles record fascinating details about how mattress quality affected survival rates during particularly brutal winters. Families with well-maintained straw systems had significantly higher survival rates than those who neglected their bedding maintenance. During the devastating winter of 1315, surviving accounts describe households where family members sleeping on compressed, worn-out straw died, while those on properly maintained mattresses survived in the same rooms. The positioning of straw mattresses within sleeping areas followed sophisticated principles that maximize thermal benefits while managing practical concerns like moisture control and pest management. Thomas places their family mattress on a raised wooden platform that elevates it above the cold ground, while allowing air circulation underneath that prevents mold and rot that could create health hazards and eliminate insulation properties. Medieval families also developed specialized straw blends that incorporated other plant materials based on their thermal and practical properties. Dried fern provided excellent insulation, but could harbor fleas, so it was mixed with aromatic herbs that repelled insects. Cattail fluff was sometimes added for extra softness and insulation, while oak leaves provided natural antimicrobial properties that prevented dangerous infections. But straw mattresses weren't just individual sleeping surfaces, they were components in larger thermal management systems that incorporated multiple heat sources and retention methods. Thomas arranges their straw mattress to work in conjunction with heated stones, shared body heat, and animal companions, creating an integrated survival system where each element enhances the others. The daily maintenance routine reveals just how much work went into maintaining medieval sleeping systems. Emma spends part of each morning inspecting the straw for signs of compression moisture damage or pest infestation. She adds fresh material where needed, redistributes existing straw for optimal loft, and adjusts the herbal additions based on seasonal needs and family health concerns. Historians still argue whether medieval people were genuinely comfortable on straw mattresses, or if they simply accepted discomfort as unavoidable. Surviving personal accounts suggest that well-made straw bedding could actually be quite comfortable, while providing superior thermal properties compared to solid surfaces that conducted heat away from sleeping bodies. You settle onto your imagined straw mattress and feel it give slightly under your weight, while maintaining enough support to keep you elevated above the cold floor. The dried stalks rustle softly with each movement, releasing the faint scent of summer fields and herbs that somehow makes the approaching winter night seem less threatening. This isn't primitive bedding, it's sophisticated survival technology disguised as humble farm materials. You witness the evening ritual as families throughout the village begin their elaborate dance of communal sleeping logistics, a carefully choreographed rotation system that treats human bodies like precious heating resources to be shared, traded, and strategically positioned for maximum survival benefit. This isn't about comfort or privacy. It's about mathematical precision in thermal management that turns entire villages into interconnected heating networks, where everyone's survival depends on everyone else's warmth. The rotation system begins with what medieval families called the accounting, a nightly assessment of who generates the most heat, who needs the most warming, and how to arrange bodies for optimal thermal distribution. Thomas Fletcher stands in his cottage's centre, mentally calculating the heat-generating capacity of each family member against their thermal needs, like a medieval thermal engineer planning a complex heating system using only human components. Tonight's configuration places Emma in the centre position, because she's running a slight fever, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to make her body an excellent heat source for the others. Thomas positions himself on her right side where he can benefit from her elevated temperature while contributing his own adult-level heat production. Little Agnes gets the coveted spot between her parents, where she can absorb warmth from both sides while her rapid child metabolism contributes heat to their shared thermal pool. But the real sophistication appears in how medieval families learn to read body heat signatures throughout the night and adjust positions accordingly. Around midnight, when adult body temperatures naturally drop, families perform subtle repositioning that maintains thermal balance without fully awakening anyone. Emma might roll toward Thomas, creating better heat contact, while Agnes instinctively curls tighter against her mother's warmth. The village-wide rotation system reveals even more complex thermal management strategies that would impress modern emergency management experts. Families with particularly effective heat generators, pregnant women, robust teenagers, or anyone running mild fevers sometimes shared their thermal resources with neighbouring households, where elderly or sick members needed additional warmth to survive the night. Medieval records describe fascinating protocols for these inter-household warming arrangements. During the brutal winter of 1347, surviving accounts tell of village families who created rotating schedules where households with the best heating setups hosted members of families whose own thermal systems weren't adequate for survival. It wasn't charity, it was community-based survival insurance, where helping others survive meant ensuring your own family would receive similar help when needed. The positioning strategies reveal sophisticated understanding of heat transfer that medieval families developed through generations of life and death experience. Bodies were arranged to create thermal chains where heat flowed from the warmest person through intermediate family members to reach the coldest individuals. Pregnant women served as thermal hubs with other family members positioned around them in patterns that maximized heat distribution while protecting the most vulnerable. But here's where medieval thermal logistics get truly remarkable. Families developed specific protocols for nighttime repositioning that maintained thermal efficiency without disturbing sleep patterns. Thomas learns to recognize Emma's breathing changes that indicate she's getting cold, automatically rolling closer to provide additional warmth. Agnes was trained from infancy to seek out the warmest available body if she woke up cold, crawling between adult family members who would unconsciously adjust to accommodate her thermal needs. Medieval families also created backup heating protocols for emergencies when their primary thermal arrangements weren't sufficient for survival. If someone showed signs of dangerous cold exposure during the night, the entire family would implement emergency warming procedures surrounding the cold person, with multiple bodies sharing breath warmth and even using direct skin-to-skin contact that could mean the difference between life and death. The social implications of these rotating sleeping arrangements created unique family dynamics that modern people struggle to understand. Medieval families developed intimate knowledge of each other's body temperatures, breathing patterns, and thermal needs that created bonds deeper than emotional connection. They literally kept each other alive through the most vulnerable hours of each day. Medieval chronicles record heartbreaking instances where rotation systems failed and families lost members to cold exposure. These accounts often describe the guilt felt by survivors who blame themselves for positioning decisions that may have contributed to deaths. But they also reveal the remarkable survival rates achieved by families who mastered the art of human heat distribution. The morning assessment ritual completed each night's thermal rotation cycle, as families evaluated how well their positioning strategies had worked and made adjustments for future nights. Bodies were checked for signs of cold exposure, positions were discussed and refined, and successful configurations were noted for repetition during similar weather conditions. But the most fascinating aspect of communal sleeping rotations was how they created opportunities for intimate family bonding that strengthened social connections essential for survival. Families who slept together in coordinated thermal systems developed communication skills, trust levels, and cooperative abilities that made them more effective at all aspects of winter survival, from food sharing to resource management. Medieval families developed specific training programs for children that taught them to participate effectively in rotation systems from early ages. Young children learned to recognize temperature changes in family members, to position themselves for optimal heat sharing, and to wake adults if thermal conditions became dangerous during the night. Historians still argue whether these elaborate rotation systems were primarily about physical survival, or if they served important psychological functions that helped families cope with the stress and isolation of winter survival. What's certain is that families who mastered communal thermal management had dramatically higher survival rates than those who attempted individual sleeping arrangements. You settle into your imagined position in the Fletcher family's thermal rotation, feeling Emma's feverish warmth on your left side, while Thomas's steady heat radiates from your right. Little Agnes curls against your back, her small body contributing surprising warmth while benefiting from the heat cocoon created by adult bodies. This isn't sleeping, it's participating in a survival system that turns family love into literal life-saving warmth. You watch Thomas Fletcher wrap heated stones from the cottage hearth in rags, and realize you're witnessing one of medieval survival's most crucial evening ceremonies, the warming pan ritual that transformed simple rocks into life-saving thermal batteries, capable of preventing death by hypothermia through the coldest hours of winter nights. This isn't just adding comfort to medieval beds, it's sophisticated heat storage technology that could mean the difference between waking up alive or becoming another winter casualty. The stone selection process reveals knowledge about thermal properties that medieval families accumulated through generations of trial and error, with potentially fatal consequences. Thomas doesn't grab random rocks from outside, he carefully chooses specific stones based on their heat retention capabilities, safety characteristics, and durability under extreme temperature changes. River stones are preferred because their smooth surfaces won't tear fabric coverings, while their dense composition holds heat for hours without cracking under thermal stress. But here's where medieval heating technology gets truly ingenious. The stones aren't just heated and thrown into beds like primitive hot water bottles. Thomas creates a sophisticated system of thermal batteries with different heating schedules designed to provide warmth throughout the entire night. Large stones go into the fire first, because they take longer to heat thoroughly, but retain warmth until dawn. Smaller stones are heated later to provide immediate warmth that helps family members fall asleep despite the bone-numbing cold. The wrapping technique transforms simple cloth into precision thermal management equipment that would impress modern engineers. Thomas uses multiple layers of wool and linen arranged in specific patterns that control heat release rates, while preventing dangerous burns that could cause deadly injuries during winter when healing was nearly impossible. The inner layer of fine linen prevents overheating, while outer wool layers regulate heat transfer to maintain safe temperatures against human skin. Medieval families developed specific positioning strategies for their heated stones that maximized thermal benefits, while managing safety concerns that could turn heating aids into hazardous weapons. The largest stones are placed at foot level where they warm the extremities most vulnerable to frostbite, while being far enough from the torso to prevent overheating that could cause dangerous sweating. Medium stones are positioned along the sides of sleeping areas, creating thermal barriers that prevent heat loss to cold walls. But the most sophisticated aspect of the warming stone system was how different family members received customized thermal treatments based on their individual survival needs. Little Agnes gets small, carefully wrapped stones positioned near her core to maintain her vital organ temperatures, while Thomas receives larger thermal masses placed strategically to warm his adult body without overwhelming his natural heat regulation systems. The timing of stone heating reveals the complex logistics medieval families mastered to coordinate multiple survival systems simultaneously. Stones begin heating during the family's evening meal preparation, ensuring they reach optimal temperatures by bedtime, while still leaving coals in the fire for overnight heating needs. The larger stones are rotated out of the fire in carefully timed sequences that provide continuous heat availability throughout the night. Medieval chronicles record fascinating details about how warming stone techniques varied between social classes and regions, revealing different approaches to the same fundamental survival challenge. Noble families used specially carved soapstone warmers that retained heat longer and distributed it more evenly, while peasant families made do with whatever stones they could find, but developed superior wrapping and positioning techniques through necessity. The maintenance and safety protocols surrounding warming stones reveal just how dangerous this survival technique could become if not properly managed. Thomas checks each stone's wrapping for tears or thin spots that could allow dangerous heat contact with skin, because burns during winter could easily become infected wounds that proved fatal. Stones that crack during heating are immediately discarded because sharp edges could cause cuts that would lead to dangerous heat and blood loss. But warming stones weren't just individual comfort items, they were components in larger thermal management systems that incorporated multiple heat sources and retention methods. The stones work in conjunction with body heat-sharing layered clothing systems and animal companions to create integrated survival networks where each element enhances the other's effectiveness. Medieval families developed specific techniques for reheating stones during the night, without disturbing the entire family's sleep or risking dangerous fire management in darkness. The most thermally responsible family member, usually the adult with the most experience, learned to carefully extract cooled stones and replace them with freshly heated ones using techniques that maintained thermal continuity while managing safety risks. The morning stone management routine reveals the ongoing work required to maintain these thermal systems throughout winter. Thomas carefully unwraps each stone to assess its condition, checking for cracks or damage that would make it unsafe for future use. Stones showing wear are retired from sleeping duty, but might continue serving as foot warmers or hand heaters for less critical applications. Medieval families also developed specialized heating stone techniques for medical emergencies when someone showed signs of dangerous hypothermia or cold-related illness. Emergency warming protocols involve surrounding patients with multiple heated stones while managing the delicate balance between providing life-saving warmth and preventing thermal shock that could prove as dangerous as the cold itself. The social aspects of warming stone management created opportunities for family bonding and cooperation that strengthened survival-essential relationships. Children learned to help with stone preparation, developing skills and responsibility while contributing to family survival efforts. Elderly family members often specialized in stone wrapping techniques, providing valuable contributions to thermal management even when their own heat production was limited. Historians still argue whether warming stones were primarily practical survival tools or if they served important psychological functions that helped families cope with winter survival stress. What's certain is that families who mastered stone heating techniques had higher survival rates and better overall health during brutal winter periods. You settle into your imagined medieval bed and feel the gentle warmth radiating from stones positioned strategically around your body, one at your feet, maintaining circulation, another along your back preventing heat loss to the wall, and a small one near your core, providing thermal security that somehow makes the endless winter night seem survivable through nothing more sophisticated than heated rocks and human ingenuity. You pull the heavy woolen blankets over your head alongside the Fletcher family and discover one of medieval survival's most intimate secrets, the deliberate art of shared breath warming that turned ordinary respiration into a life-saving heating system capable of raising temperatures by crucial degrees during the most dangerous hours of winter nights. This wasn't just sleeping close together, it was sophisticated respiratory coordination that transformed family breathing into collective thermal management. The science behind breath warming would fascinate modern physiologists studying human heat exchange mechanisms. Each exhale releases air heated to body temperature roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, along with moisture that carry additional thermal energy. Medieval families learned to position themselves so that this constant stream of warm, humid air could be captured and recycled among family members, creating microclimate zones under shared coverings that could be 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. But here's where medieval breath management gets truly ingenious. Families developed specific breathing techniques that maximized heat sharing while managing carbon dioxide buildup that could become dangerous in enclosed spaces under heavy blankets. Thomas and Emma learned to breathe in alternating rhythms that create continuous warm air circulation, with one person exhaling while the other inhales fresh air from outside their shared breathing space. The positioning strategies for effective breath warming reveal sophisticated understanding of airflow dynamics that medieval families developed through generations of survival experience. Agnes sleeps between her parents with her face positioned to receive warm exhales from both sides while her own breath contributes to the shared thermal pool. The family creates a complex breathing network where warm air flows from person to person, gradually raising the temperature in their shared sleeping space. Medieval families developed specific protocols for managing shared breathing spaces that balanced thermal benefits with safety concerns about oxygen depletion and carbon dioxide poisoning. Heavy blankets were arranged to create partial enclosures that trapped warm air while maintaining openings that allowed fresh air circulation. Families learned to recognize the signs of poor air quality and adjust their breathing arrangements accordingly. The most remarkable aspect of medieval breath warming was how families coordinated their respiratory patterns during sleep to maintain optimal heat sharing throughout the night. Parents learned to sleep in positions that directed their warm exhales toward children who needed additional heat, while children instinctively positioned themselves to benefit from adult breathing warmth without interfering with necessary air circulation. Medieval chronicles record fascinating accounts of how breath-warming techniques saved lives during particularly brutal winter nights. During the devastating winter of 1348, surviving records describe families who survived by creating elaborate breath-sharing arrangements under piled coverings, while neighbouring families who failed to master these techniques were found frozen despite having similar heating resources. But shared breathing wasn't just about temperature control, it served crucial psychological functions that helped families manage the terror and anxiety of potentially not surviving until dawn. The sound and feel of family members breathing created reassurance that everyone was still alive, while the intimate closeness required for effective breath warming strengthened family bonds that were essential for overall survival cooperation. The morning assessment of breath-warming effectiveness reveals how precisely medieval families monitored their thermal management systems. Thomas checks each family member for signs of overheating or oxygen deprivation that could indicate the previous night's breathing arrangements were too intense. Families learn to adjust their techniques based on factors like outdoor temperature, individual health conditions, and the effectiveness of other heating systems. Medieval families also developed emergency breathing protocols for situations where someone showed signs of dangerous hypothermia or cold-related distress. Emergency warming procedures involved multiple family members creating intense breath-sharing arrangements around the affected person, using coordinated respiration to provide concentrated warming that could prevent death from cold exposure. The social implications of shared breathing arrangements created unprecedented intimacy levels that modern families would find difficult to understand. Medieval family members developed detailed knowledge of each other's breathing patterns, sleep rhythms, and respiratory health that created bonds deeper than emotional connection. They literally shared the breath of life during the most vulnerable hours of each day. But breath-warming techniques weren't limited to immediate family members. Village communities sometimes created extended breathing networks during extreme weather events. Larger groups would gather in the warmest available spaces and coordinate breathing arrangements that could keep dozens of people alive when individual family thermal systems weren't sufficient for survival. Medieval families developed specific training methods for children that taught effective participation in breath-warming systems from early ages. Young children learned to position themselves optimally for receiving warm air from adults, while contributing their own respiratory heat to family thermal pools. They were trained to recognize when breathing arrangements needed adjustment and to alert adults to potential problems. The medical applications of breath warming reveal sophisticated understanding of respiratory therapy that medieval families used to treat cold-related illnesses and breathing problems. Warm, humid exhales directed towards someone with respiratory distress could provide relief similar to modern steam treatments, while shared breathing helped maintain body temperatures essential for fighting off infections. Historians still argue whether medieval breathing techniques were primarily practical survival methods or if they incorporated spiritual or ritualistic elements that provided psychological comfort during survival crises. Some evidence suggests families combined breath warming with prayer or meditation practices that enhance both thermal and emotional benefits. You settle under the imagined weight of heavy medieval blankets and feel the Fletcher family's breathing create a warm, humid microclimate around your face. Emma's gentle exhale warms your left cheek, while Thomas's deeper breathing provides steady heat from your right side. Little Agnes's rapid child breathing contributes surprising warmth to the shared space, while her position allows her to benefit from the thermal cocoon created by adult respiratory systems. This isn't just sleeping together, it's participating in an ancient survival technique that turns the simple act of breathing into collective life-saving warmth. You follow the Fletcher family as they abandon their sleeping area and migrate toward the kitchen hearth, witnessing one of medieval survival's most dramatic adaptations, the complete abandonment of bedrooms in favor of sleeping around ovens and cooking fires in carefully choreographed proximity that turned food preparation areas into communal survival shelters. This wasn't about comfort or convenience. It was about recognizing that during the coldest nights the difference between life and death often came down to those few precious degrees of warmth that only active fires could provide. The migration begins as temperatures drop below the threshold, where even the most sophisticated bedding and body heat sharing can't guarantee survival until dawn. Thomas makes the decision based on years of experience, reading winter warning signs, the way frost forms patterns on interior walls, how the family's breath clouds linger longer in the air, and the subtle behavioral changes in their animals that indicate dangerously cold conditions developing outside. Medieval kitchens weren't designed as sleeping spaces, but they evolved into sophisticated survival shelters during winter emergencies through necessity and ingenuity that would impress modern emergency management experts. The large central hearth provides the most consistent heat source in the cottage, while the brick or stone construction stores and radiates thermal energy long after active fires burn down. The kitchen's smaller space also traps heat more effectively than larger sleeping areas. But here's where medieval heat migration gets truly strategic. Families didn't just pile randomly around cooking fires like refugees. They developed specific positioning systems that maximize thermal benefits, while managing safety risks and maintaining access to essential survival activities. Thomas and Emma position themselves closest to the fire, where their adult bodies can absorb maximum heat, while serving as thermal barriers that protect children from dangerous overheating or accidental burns. The sleeping arrangements around kitchen fires reveal sophisticated understanding of heat distribution and air circulation that medieval families mastered through generations of winter survival experience. Little Agnes sleeps in a protected alcove created by her parents' bodies, close enough to benefit from fire heat but shielded from dangerous sparks or shifting logs. William, the teenage son, takes responsibility for monitoring and maintaining the fire throughout the night, positioning himself where he can tend flames without disturbing other family members. Medieval families developed specific protocols for managing overnight fires that balanced heating needs with safety concerns that could turn life-saving warmth into deadly house fires. The fire is carefully banked with ash and slow-burning hardwood that provides steady heat, without the dangerous flare-ups that could ignite clothing or bedding. Water containers are positioned nearby for emergencies while escape routes are kept clear despite the crowded sleeping arrangements. But the most remarkable aspect of kitchen sleeping was how families transformed food preparation areas into integrated survival systems that addressed multiple winter challenges simultaneously. The residual heat from cooking fires warmed food stores, preventing them from freezing solid and becoming inedible. The warm space also served as a refuge for small livestock that might not survive outdoor temperatures, creating additional heat sources while protecting valuable animals. The logistics of sleeping in cooking areas required careful management of space safety and sanitation that reveals how precisely medieval families understood the challenges of survival shelter. Cooking utensils and food preparation surfaces are cleaned and moved to create sleeping space, while maintaining access to emergency food supplies that might be needed during the night. Chamber pots are positioned away from food areas but close enough for nighttime use without leaving the warm zone. Medieval chronicles record fascinating accounts of entire villages that survived brutal winters by converting all available cooking spaces into communal sleeping areas. During the devastating winter of 1315, surviving records describe communities where families abandoned individual cottages, entirely gathering in bakeries, brewhouses, and manor kitchens, where large ovens could provide sufficient heat for dozens of people sleeping in carefully organized arrangements. The social dynamics of kitchen sleeping created unique community experiences that strengthened survival essential relationships while testing family cooperation under extreme stress. Multiple families might share large kitchen spaces in manor houses or communal buildings, creating intimate living arrangements where social hierarchies temporarily dissolved in favor of thermal democracy. Whoever could contribute most heat or fire-tending skills received better positioning regardless of normal social status. Medieval families developed specific techniques for maintaining cooking fires throughout 14-hour winter nights that required sophisticated understanding of fuel management, air circulation, and fire safety. Different types of wood were selected for specific burning characteristics: hardwoods like oak for long-lasting heat, softwoods like pine for quick temperature boosts, and specialized materials like animal dung that burned slowly and steadily when wood supplies were limited. But kitchen heat migration wasn't just about surviving individual nights. It was about managing fuel resources throughout entire winter seasons when heating materials were precious and limited. Families calculated how much wood they could afford to burn for overnight heating versus cooking, needs making life and death decisions about resource allocation that balanced immediate survival against long-term winter survival requirements. The morning routine after kitchen sleeping reveals the complex logistics medieval families mastered to transition survival spaces back into functional cooking areas. Sleeping materials are quickly cleared and stored, fires are adjusted for food preparation rather than space heating, and families assess whether outdoor temperatures have risen enough to return to normal sleeping arrangements, or if another night of heat migration will be necessary. Historians still argue whether kitchen sleeping was primarily an emergency survival technique, or if it became a regular winter practice for families with insufficient heating resources in their main living areas. Evidence suggests both patterns existed, with some families migrating to kitchen heat only during the most dangerous weather, while others made cooking areas their primary winter sleeping spaces for entire seasons. You settle onto the stone floor beside the Fletcher family's kitchen hearth, feeling the intense warmth radiating from banked coals, while listening to the gentle pops and hisses of wood slowly burning through the night. The cooking area feels cramped with 5 people and assorted animals, but the heat penetrates your bones in a way that makes you understand why medieval families willingly sacrificed comfort and privacy for the simple luxury of sleeping warm enough to survive until dawn. You enter the stone corridors of St. Bede's Monastery and discover how religious communities developed some of medieval Europe's most sophisticated group sleeping methods, techniques that balance spiritual requirements with thermal necessity in ways that reveal the remarkable ingenuity of monks who had to survive winter while maintaining religious discipline. This wasn't just communal sleeping. It was a carefully orchestrated system that turned monastic dormitories into precision-engineered survival shelters, where prayer and body heat became equally important for making it through brutal winter nights. The monastery's dormitory stretches before you, like a medieval barracks designed by someone who understood that spiritual devotion meant nothing if the devoted froze to death before matins. 40 narrow beds line the stone walls in perfectly measured intervals that maximize heat sharing, while maintaining the individual sleeping spaces required by monastic rules. Each monk's sleeping area is just wide enough for a single body, but positioned close enough to neighbours that collective body heat creates warming zones that keep everyone alive. Monastic sleeping arrangements reveal sophisticated understanding of group thermal dynamics that would fascinate modern crowd management experts. The dormitory's layout places the youngest, most heat-generating monks in strategic positions throughout the space, creating thermal anchors around which older brothers can position themselves for optimal warmth sharing. The eldest monks whose bodies produce less heat, but whose experience is invaluable for community survival, receive priority spots near whatever heating elements the monastery can afford to maintain. But here's where monastic winter survival gets truly ingenious. The religious community developed specific prayer schedules that doubled as thermal management systems, with nighttime devotions timed to coincide with the most dangerous hypothermia periods. The call to Lords at 3 a.m. wasn't just spiritual observance, it was a survival check that ensured all community members were still alive and responsive during the coldest hours before dawn. The monks' sleeping garments reveal how religious communities adapted spiritual clothing requirements to winter survival necessities without abandoning their vows. Brothers sleep in their full monastic habits, with heavy woolen robes serving as both religious observance and thermal protection. The distinctive monastic tonsure, rather than being a disadvantage in cold weather, actually helps regulate body temperature by preventing overheating under multiple clothing layers and heavy blankets. Medieval monastic chronicles record fascinating detail about how religious communities managed the tension between individual spiritual discipline and collective survival needs. During particularly brutal winters, strict rules about personal possessions were temporarily relaxed to allow monks to share extra blankets, warming stones, and even body heat in ways that might normally be considered inappropriate contact. Survival trumped propriety when temperatures threatened to eliminate the entire community. The monastery's heating system incorporates architectural features specifically designed for group thermal management that reveal sophisticated understanding of heat distribution in large spaces. The dormitory's stone walls are built with internal channels that circulate warm air from the monastery's central heating system, while windows are positioned to minimize heat loss while maintaining the ventilation necessary for 40 men sleeping in close quarters. But the most remarkable aspect of monastic winter survival was how communities developed spiritual practices that served practical thermal functions while maintaining religious authenticity. Communal prayers were conducted in closely grouped formations that shared body heat, while meditation practices incorporated breathing techniques that created warm microclimates within the dormitory. Even religious fasting was modified during extreme cold to ensure monks maintained the caloric intake necessary for survival-level heat production. The Brotherhood's approach to individual thermal needs reveals how religious communities balanced egalitarian principles with practical survival requirements. Elderly monks and those suffering from cold-related illnesses received additional thermal support without violating monastic equality principles through community decisions that framed extra warmth as medical necessity rather than special privilege. Medieval monasteries also developed specific protocols for managing thermal emergencies when individual community members showed signs of dangerous hypothermia or cold-related distress. Emergency warming procedures involved surrounding affected monks with multiple brothers who provided concentrated body heat while maintaining appropriate spiritual conduct through prayer and religious conversation that kept everyone conscious and responsive. The monastic schedule itself became a thermal management tool during winter months, with daily activities timed to maximize heat generation and conservation throughout the community's survival needs. Morning prayers were extended to keep everyone active during the coldest pre-dawn hours, while evening devotions were positioned to prepare bodies for the thermal challenges of 14-hour winter nights. But monastic sleeping systems weren't just about physical survival. They served crucial spiritual functions that helped religious communities maintain faith and discipline during the psychological stress of winter survival. The sound of 40 men breathing and praying in unison created reassurance that the community would survive collectively, while shared thermal struggles strengthened brotherhood bonds, essential for maintaining religious life under extreme hardship. Medieval monasteries developed specific training programs for new monks that taught effective participation in communal thermal systems alongside religious instruction. Novices learned to position themselves optimally within dormitory heating networks while maintaining appropriate spiritual conduct, and were educated about recognizing thermal emergencies in fellow community members. The morning assessment routine after dormitory sleeping reveals how precisely monastic communities monitored their collective thermal management systems. The prior conducts daily checks of all community members for signs of cold exposure or related health problems, while brothers report on the effectiveness of heating arrangements and suggest modifications for improving survival rates. Historians still argue whether monastic thermal management systems were primarily practical survival techniques, or if they incorporated spiritual elements that enhance both physical and religious benefits. Evidence suggests these communities successfully integrated survival necessity with religious devotion in ways that strengthen both physical resilience and spiritual commitment. You settle into your imagined monk's cell within the dormitory and feel the collective warmth of 40 religious men who have learned to survive winter through community cooperation that serves both God and thermal necessity. The stone walls exhale cold, but the Brotherhood's shared heat and coordinated breathing create a sacred microclimate, where spiritual devotion and survival instinct merge into something that transcends both individual comfort and personal salvation. You hold baby Margaret Fletcher in your arms as Emma demonstrates the desperate medieval techniques for keeping infants alive through sub-freezing indoor temperatures, and you realize you're witnessing some of humanity's most heartbreaking and ingenious survival adaptations methods that turned newborn care into a constant battle against cold that claimed countless tiny lives despite parents' most devoted efforts. This isn't just childcare, it's intensive thermal management where every decision about infant positioning, clothing and feeding could determine whether a baby lived to see spring. Medieval infant survival rates during winter months reveal the brutal mathematics of thermal management in an age without central heating or modern medical intervention. Babies lose body heat at rates that would kill them within hours if left unattended because their high surface area to body mass ratio makes them incredibly vulnerable to temperature changes. Medieval parents learned to treat newborn thermal protection as literally a matter of life and death that required constant vigilance and sophisticated heat-sharing techniques. But here's where medieval infant care gets both ingenious and heartbreaking. Parents developed skin-to-skin contact methods that essentially turned adult bodies into human incubators capable of maintaining baby temperatures within survivable ranges. Emma keeps baby Margaret pressed directly against her bare chest under multiple layers of clothing, creating a thermal environment where the infant can benefit from her mother's body heat heartbeat and breathing warmth simultaneously. The clothing systems for winter babies reveal sophisticated understanding of infant thermal needs that would impress modern pediatric specialists. Margaret wears multiple layers of the softest available fabrics, starting with fine linen against her delicate skin, then wool wrapped carefully to avoid irritation, and finally fur, or the family's best blankets, arranged to trap heat while allowing enough air circulation to prevent overheating that could be as dangerous as cold exposure. Medieval families developed specific positioning techniques for infant survival that balanced thermal protection with feeding needs and parental sleep requirements. Emma sleeps with Margaret positioned on her chest where the baby can benefit from maximum body heat while maintaining access for nighttime nursing that provides both nutrition and additional warmth through the physical contact required for breastfeeding. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval infant winter care was how entire families reorganized their survival systems around protecting the most vulnerable member. Thomas and William positioned themselves to create wind barriers around Emma and the baby, while little Agnes contributes her child-level body heat by sleeping pressed against her mother's back. The whole family becomes a coordinated infant heating system, where everyone's survival activities serve the primary goal of keeping the baby alive. Medieval chronicles record heartbreaking accounts of families' desperate attempts to save infants during particularly brutal winters, revealing both successful techniques and tragic failures that highlight the challenges of pre-modern childcare. During the devastating winter of 1348, surviving records describe parents who stayed awake in shifts throughout entire nights, continuously monitoring infant body temperatures and adjusting thermal protection based on subtle changes in baby breathing patterns or skin color. The feeding challenges for winter babies reveal how cold temperatures complicated every aspect of infant care in ways that modern parents can barely imagine. Breastfeeding required Emma to expose parts of her body to dangerous cold, creating thermal dilemmas where feeding the baby could threaten the mother's survival. Families developed techniques for maintaining milk temperature and protecting nursing mothers from heat loss during feeding sessions. Medieval families also developed specific warming techniques for babies showing signs of dangerous cold exposure that combined practical thermal management with folk medical practices passed down through generations of infant survival experience. Emergency warming protocols involved surrounding cold babies with multiple family members while using heated stones, warm breath, and even small amounts of warmed wine or honey water to raise internal body temperatures. But infant thermal protection wasn't just about physical techniques, it involved community support systems that recognized baby survival as essential for family and village continuity. Neighboring women with successful infant survival experience shared knowledge about thermal management techniques, while families with particularly effective heating setups sometimes provided temporary shelter for mothers with newborns during the most dangerous weather. The psychological stress of maintaining infant thermal protection throughout winter months created enormous emotional pressure on medieval parents who understood that any mistake could result in losing their child. Emma spends most of winter nights in a state of semi-consciousness, constantly monitoring Margaret's breathing temperature and responsiveness, while managing her own survival needs and maintaining heat production essential for keeping the baby alive. Medieval families developed specific assessment techniques for monitoring infant thermal status that helped parents recognize dangerous cold exposure before it became fatal. Changes in baby skin color, breathing patterns, responsiveness, and crying intensity all provided crucial information about thermal status that allowed parents to adjust protection methods before reaching crisis situations. The social implications of intensive infant thermal care created family dynamics, where newborn survival became the organizing principle around which all other winter activities revolved. Family schedules, sleeping arrangements, food distribution, and even fuel allocation were modified to support the enormous thermal requirements of keeping babies alive through medieval winter conditions. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of medieval infant winter care was how parents had to make impossible decisions about resource allocation when survival requirements for babies conflicted with thermal needs of other family members. Families sometimes had to choose between heating arrangements that favored infant survival versus configurations that protected elderly grandparents or other vulnerable family members. Medieval records suggest that families who successfully kept infants alive through winter developed specialized knowledge and techniques that made them valuable resources for entire communities. Women like Emma, who mastered infant thermal management, often served as advisors for other families facing similar challenges, creating informal networks of survival expertise that improved overall child survival rates. You feel baby Margaret's tiny body pressed against Emma's chest and understand the constant terror medieval parents lived with throughout winter months. The knowledge that this precious life depends entirely on maintaining thermal conditions that require perfect vigilance, sophisticated technique, and enormous sacrifice from every family member who contributes to the complex heating system that stands between an innocent baby and the killing cold that claims so many tiny lives before spring returns. You enter Lord Aldrich's manor during the depths of winter, and immediately witness the brutal reality that wealth couldn't eliminate cold, but it could definitely purchase priority access to the warmest spots, while poor families froze to death just yards away. This isn't just social inequality, it's thermal apartheid, where your position in the medieval hierarchy literally determined whether you woke up alive, and where class privilege was measured not in gold or land, but in precious degrees of life-saving warmth. The manor's great hall reveals the sophisticated heat hierarchy that governed medieval survival, with sleeping positions allocated according to rigid social protocols that put the most important people closest to the fire, while servants, labourers, and unfortunate visitors received spots that might as well be outside in the snow. Lord Aldrich and his family claim the prime real estate directly in front of the massive stone hearth, surrounded by layers of expensive furs, feather mattresses, and heated stones that create a thermal paradise just feet away from areas where people literally freeze to death. But here's where medieval class-based heating gets truly brutal. The temperature difference between the lord's sleeping area and the servants' section can be 30 degrees or more, which represents the difference between uncomfortable cold and fatal hypothermia. Noble families sleep in relative warmth, while their household staff huddle together on the stone floor, sharing body heat and whatever scraps of blankets they can acquire, knowing that their survival depends entirely on the thermal charity of masters who control access to heat. The allocation of heating resources reveals how social status translated directly into survival odds during medieval winters. Lady Aldrich receives heated stones replaced throughout the night by servants whose own bodies are going numb from cold exposure, while their teenage son gets priority access to the warmest clothing and bedding, that could save the life of a servant child sleeping 20 feet away. Wealth doesn't just buy comfort, it literally purchases continued existence through the thermal advantages that keep blood flowing and hearts beating. Medieval manor household records reveal the calculated brutality of heat distribution systems that treated human thermal needs as commodities to be allocated based on social worth rather than biological necessity. Servants receive heating rations measured in hours of fire access, amounts of firewood for personal use, and even specific permissions for sharing body heat with other household members. Heat becomes currency in an economy where the poor can literally freeze to death while serving masters who complain about minor temperature inconveniences. But the most shocking aspect of class-based thermal inequality was how it created survival competitions within households, where servants competed for heating privileges that could mean life or death. Kitchen maids might receive slightly better thermal treatment because their work required manual dexterity that cold exposure would eliminate, while stable hands and field workers were expected to tolerate near-fatal cold exposure because their duties involved outdoor work anyway. The servants' sleeping arrangements reveal the sophisticated survival techniques that medieval poor people developed to stay alive while their masters monopolized heating resources. 20 servants might sleep pressed together in carefully coordinated body heat sharing systems, while rotating schedules allowed different individuals to briefly approach the main fire for life-saving warmth before returning to the cold zones where they are expected to survive until dawn. Medieval chronicles record heartbreaking accounts of servants found frozen to death in manor halls, while their lords slept comfortably just feet away, revealing how class privilege literally meant the difference between survival and death. During the brutal winter of 1347, surviving records describe households where multiple servants died from cold exposure, while noble families complained about minor inconveniences like having to wear extra robes to bed. But heat inequality wasn't just about nighttime sleeping arrangements. It affected every aspect of winter survival, from food, access to medical care, to basic human dignity. Servants showing signs of cold exposure might receive minimal thermal treatment if it interfered with their work duties, while nobles with similar symptoms would receive immediate warming attention from multiple attendants who risk their own cold exposure to provide thermal care. The psychological dynamics of thermal inequality created resentment and desperation that sometimes led to survival conflicts within households. Servants might steal heating resources, sneak closer to fires during nighttime hours, or even sabotage heating systems that served masters while ignoring their own life-threatening thermal needs. Heat theft became a crime punishable by expulsion from the household, which was essentially a death sentence during winter months. Medieval manor management developed specific protocols for maintaining heating hierarchies that balanced social control with practical survival needs that kept households functional. Too much thermal inequality could kill off the servants necessary for basic operations, while too much heating equality could undermine the social structures that maintained noble authority and privilege. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of class-based heat distribution was how it normalized the systematic thermal abuse of poor people who were expected to risk death from cold exposure as part of their ordinary service duties. Servants learned to function while experiencing early stages of hypothermia, to work with frostbitten fingers, and to accept cold-related illness as natural consequences of their social position, rather than preventable suffering caused by resource hoarding. The morning assessment of thermal casualties reveals the routine brutality of medieval heating inequality, as household managers counted servants who survived the night, while calculating whether dead staff members needed immediate replacement, or if survivors could absorb additional work duties. Human thermal suffering became a management problem rather than a moral crisis requiring system changes. Medieval visitors to noble households often recorded shock at the extreme temperature differences within single buildings, describing manor halls where guests could be simultaneously entertained by warmly dressed nobles while watching servants display obvious signs of dangerous cold exposure just yards away. These accounts reveal how normalized thermal inequality had become in medieval society. But some noble families developed more equitable heating systems that balanced class privilege with human survival needs, creating thermal arrangements that maintained social hierarchies while ensuring that household members didn't freeze to death from exposure. These families often had higher household survival rates and more loyal service staff who appreciated masters willing to share life-saving warmth. You settle into your imagined position in the manor's thermal hierarchy and feel the sharp contrast between the lord's radiating warmth and the bitter cold that penetrates areas where servants huddle together for survival. This isn't just social inequality. It's a system that turns heat into a weapon of class control, where your birth circumstances determine whether you freeze to death or sleep warm, while others die from cold just feet away. You rush to the side of young William Fletcher as his lips turn blue and his shivering becomes violent, uncontrollable spasms that signal the onset of dangerous hypothermia, and you're about to witness medieval families' most desperate survival protocols, emergency warming techniques that could save lives or accidentally kill patients through thermal shock, depending on the skill and knowledge of people who had to make life-and-death medical decisions with nothing but folk wisdom and fierce determination. The recognition of hypothermia stages reveals sophisticated medical knowledge that medieval families accumulated through generations of winter survival experience. Emma immediately identifies William's condition based on warning signs that modern emergency medical technicians would recognize: the violent shivering that indicates his body is still fighting to generate heat, the mental confusion that suggests his core temperature is dropping to dangerous levels, and the blue-tinged skin that means his circulation is shutting down to protect vital organs. But here's where medieval emergency medicine gets both brilliant and terrifying. Families developed specific warming protocols that had to balance the urgent need to raise body temperature against the deadly risk of thermal shock that could kill hypothermia victims even faster than cold exposure. Thomas and Emma work together to implement emergency warming techniques that require perfect coordination and timing, because mistakes during hypothermia treatment could stop William's heart or cause other fatal complications. The first stage of medieval emergency warming involves gradual thermal rehabilitation that slowly introduces heat to prevent the dangerous vasodilation that could cause cardiovascular collapse. Emma strips William's wet clothing, while Thomas prepares warming stones heated to specific temperatures that provide gentle heat without causing burns or rapid temperature changes. The family creates a controlled warming environment using techniques passed down through generations of survival experience. Medieval families developed specific positioning techniques for hypothermia victims that optimized heat transfer while protecting patients from thermal shock complications. William is positioned between his parents' bodies, where he can benefit from skin-to-skin contact that provides gentle, controlled warming. Emma lies along his back while Thomas presses against his chest, creating a human heating system that gradually raises William's core temperature without overwhelming his compromised circulatory system. But the most remarkable aspect of medieval hypothermia treatment was the sophisticated understanding families had about the dangers of rapid rewarming that could prove as fatal as the original cold exposure. The family carefully monitors William's responses to warming treatments, watching for signs that his body temperature is rising too quickly, or that thermal rehabilitation is causing dangerous cardiovascular stress that requires immediate modification of treatment techniques. Medieval chronicles record both successful and tragic outcomes from emergency warming procedures, revealing the delicate balance between providing life-saving heat and causing fatal thermal complications. During the brutal winter of 1315, surviving accounts describe families who successfully revived hypothermia victims using gradual warming techniques, while other households lost family members to thermal shock caused by too rapid heating of dangerously cold bodies. The breathing and circulation support techniques that medieval families used during hypothermia emergencies reveal sophisticated understanding of how cold exposure affects vital body functions. Emma monitors William's breathing patterns while providing warm breath directly to his face, using respiratory warming techniques that help raise his core temperature while ensuring adequate oxygen intake. Thomas checks circulation by feeling for pulse points and monitoring skin color changes that indicate improving blood flow. Medieval families also developed specific nutritional support protocols for hypothermia victims that combined practical thermal management with folk medical knowledge about foods that could help restore body heat from inside. Once William shows signs of improvement, Emma prepares warm liquids mixed with honey and herbs that provide calories for heat generation, while avoiding foods that could cause digestive problems during recovery from severe cold exposure. But emergency warming wasn't just medical treatment, it required complete family mobilization that turned hypothermia response into coordinated survival operations involving every household member. Little Agnes contributes her child-level body heat by positioning herself against William's legs, while even the family's animals are repositioned to provide additional warmth during the critical recovery period. The psychological management of hypothermia emergencies reveals how medieval families understood that mental state affected physical recovery from dangerous cold exposure. Emma talks continuously to William during treatment, using conversation to monitor his mental clarity, while providing emotional support that helps him cooperate with warming procedures. The family creates a calm, reassuring environment that reduces stress factors that could complicate thermal rehabilitation. Medieval families developed specific assessment techniques for monitoring hypothermia recovery that helped them determine when emergency warming was successful versus when victims might still be in danger despite apparent improvement. Changes in shivering patterns, skin color, mental responsiveness, and breathing quality all provided crucial information about treatment, effectiveness, and whether additional interventions were necessary. The community aspects of hypothermia response reveal how medieval villages understood that emergency warming often required resources beyond what individual families could provide alone. Neighboring households might contribute additional heating materials, extra blankets, or even their own body heat during community-wide responses to severe hypothermia cases that threatened village members' survival. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of medieval hypothermia treatment was how families had to make desperate decisions about resource allocation during medical emergencies. Saving William might require using heating fuel needed for other survival purposes, or might mean exposing other family members to additional cold risk by concentrating warming resources on the hypothermia victim. Medieval records suggest that families who successfully treated hypothermia cases developed specialized knowledge that made them valuable resources for entire communities during winter emergencies. People like Emma, who mastered emergency warming techniques, often served as informal medical advisors during hypothermia crises, sharing knowledge that could save lives throughout their villages. The recovery protocols following successful hypothermia treatment reveal the ongoing care required to prevent relapse into dangerous cold exposure. William needs careful monitoring for hours or days after emergency warming to ensure his body temperature remains stable and that he doesn't develop complications from the initial cold exposure or the warming treatment itself. You help maintain the warming cocoon around William as his violent shivering gradually subsides and his skin colour begins returning to normal, understanding that you're witnessing one of humanity's most fundamental survival challenges, the desperate fight to save someone whose body is shutting down from cold, using nothing but human warmth, folk knowledge, and the fierce determination that keeps families alive when winter tries to claim their most precious members. You wake in the pre-dawn darkness of the Fletcher cottage to Thomas, performing the grim ritual that began every medieval winter morning, the survival check that determined who had made it through another night and who had quietly slipped away in their sleep, a routine assessment that treated death by cold as such a regular occurrence that families develop specific protocols for discovering and managing overnight casualties without disrupting the thermal systems that kept survivors alive. The morning inspection begins before anyone fully awakens as Thomas moves quietly through the family's sleeping area, checking each person for signs of life that distinguish sleep from death, in conditions where both states can look disturbingly similar. His hand gently touches Emma's throat to feel for pulse and warmth, then moves to check William's breathing patterns, and finally assesses little Agnes's responsiveness to gentle touch. This isn't paranoia, it's practical medical assessment in an age where hypothermia could claim family members so quietly they'd be found frozen in peaceful sleeping positions. Medieval families developed specific techniques for distinguishing between deep sleep and death during winter months when cold exposure could cause people to slip away without struggle or obvious distress. Thomas learns to recognize the subtle differences between the relaxed breathing of healthy sleep and the shallow, irregular patterns that might indicate someone is dying from cold exposure. Skin color, body temperature, and response to gentle stimulation all provide crucial information about who survived the night's thermal challenges. But here's where medieval morning assessments get both practical and heartbreaking. Families had to balance the urgent need to identify potential casualties against the thermal disruption that could endanger other family members who were still in precarious survival situations. Thomas conducts his checks quickly and quietly to avoid disturbing the warming systems that Emma, William and Agnes depend on for continued survival throughout the remaining cold hours before dawn. The discovery protocols reveal how medieval families prepared psychologically for finding dead household members during winter months, when overnight deaths from cold exposure occurred with statistical regularity that made them tragic but not unexpected events. Thomas knows exactly what steps to take if he discovers that someone hasn't survived the night procedures that balance grieving needs with immediate survival requirements for remaining family members. Medieval village records document the routine nature of winter morning death discoveries with statistical precision that reveals just how common overnight cold casualties were during harsh winters. During the brutal winter of 1315, surviving parish records show that morning survival checks in some villages revealed death rates of 3 to 5% per night during the coldest periods, making dawn assessments as much about community headcounts as individual family welfare. The response to finding dead family members reveals the harsh pragmatism that medieval winter survival demanded from people who couldn't afford extended grieving periods when remaining family members still faced ongoing thermal emergencies. Bodies had to be moved to prevent them from drawing heat away from living family members, while funeral arrangements were postponed until weather conditions allowed for proper burial procedures. But morning survival checks weren't just about identifying overnight deaths. They served crucial medical assessment functions that help families respond to cold-related health crises before they became fatal. Thomas examines each family member for signs of frostbite hypothermia symptoms or other cold-related injuries that require immediate treatment to prevent progression to life-threatening conditions. The community aspects of morning survival assessments reveal how medieval villages developed informal mutual aid systems that ensured isolated families didn't face winter survival challenges completely alone. Neighbours established check-in protocols that verified household survival rates and provided assistance when families lost members to cold exposure or needed additional thermal support during recovery from overnight cold injuries. Medieval families also used morning assessments to evaluate the effectiveness of their thermal management systems and make adjustments that could improve survival odds for future nights. Changes in family members' cold tolerance modifications needed to heating arrangements and lessons learned from near-death experiences all informed strategic adjustments to survival techniques. The psychological coping mechanisms that families developed for handling routine death discoveries reveal the emotional resilience that medieval people had to cultivate to function during winter months, when loss of loved ones to cold exposure was a constant possibility. Parents like Thomas and Emma learned to manage grief while maintaining focus on survival activities essential for protecting remaining family members. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of morning survival checks was how they normalized the expectation of death that permeated medieval winter survival culture. Children like Agnes grew up understanding that family members might not wake up, that overnight, deaths were natural consequences of winter rather than preventable tragedies requiring systemic changes to heating resources or housing conditions. Medieval morning routines incorporated specific activities designed to restore circulation and assess cold-related injuries that might have developed during overnight exposure. Family members performed gentle exercises to evaluate extremities for frostbite damage, assess joints for cold-related stiffness, and monitor each other for signs of respiratory problems that could indicate developing pneumonia from cold exposure. The religious aspects of morning survival checks reveal how medieval families integrated spiritual practices with practical medical assessments using prayers of thanksgiving for survived nights, while also asking for divine protection during the continuing thermal challenges that each new winter day would bring. Survival became both practical and spiritual achievement that required human effort and divine assistance. Medieval families developed specific protocols for managing the emotional trauma of discovering dead household members while maintaining focus on immediate survival needs that couldn't be postponed for grief. The practical demands of winter survival often meant that mourning had to be abbreviated or delayed until spring brought conditions that allowed for extended emotional processing. The community notification systems that informed villages about overnight casualties reveal how medieval settlements understood that individual family deaths affected entire community survival networks that depended on shared thermal resources and mutual aid during winter emergencies. Death of key community members could threaten village-wide survival during extreme weather events. You participate in the Fletcher family's morning assessment, feeling the relief when each family member responds appropriately to Thomas's gentle checks, but also understanding the underlying terror that makes these daily survival confirmations necessary in a world where a single night of inadequate thermal protection could claim anyone from infants to grandparents without warning or opportunity for rescue. You witness the remarkable evening ritual as families throughout the village gather at the cottage of Widow Martha, participating in one of medieval survival's most sophisticated community innovations, rotating warm shelter systems that transformed individual family heating resources into collective survival networks where the most vulnerable members of the community received life-saving thermal sanctuary when their own homes couldn't provide adequate protection against killing cold. The rotation system operates on principles of thermal democracy that temporarily override normal social hierarchies in favor of biological necessity and community survival mathematics. Tonight, Widow Martha's cottage serves as the designated warming shelter because her large cooking hearth and well-insulated walls can provide adequate heat for 8 adults and 5 children who would face serious cold exposure risks in their own individual dwellings during the approaching brutal weather conditions. Medieval communities developed specific protocols for determining when thermal rotation became necessary, based on weather assessment techniques that helped villages coordinate collective survival responses before individual families reached crisis situations. Village elders like Thomas Fletcher evaluate factors including wind direction, cloud formations, animal behavior patterns, and their own accumulated winter survival experience to decide when community thermal sharing becomes essential for preventing overnight casualties. But here's where community heat networks get truly ingenious. The rotation systems balance thermal resources with social obligations in ways that ensure the most heat-efficient families provide shelter while the most vulnerable community members receive protection, creating survival economics where heating ability becomes community currency, used to purchase social support and mutual aid during non-winter periods. The logistics of communal warming reveal sophisticated resource management that would impress modern emergency coordination specialists. Martha's cottage has been prepared throughout the day with additional firewood extra bedding materials, borrowed from multiple households, food supplies contributed by participating families, and carefully arranged sleeping spaces that optimize heat distribution among diverse age groups and thermal needs. Medieval communities developed specific selection criteria for thermal rotation that prioritized the most vulnerable while maintaining practical limits on how many people any single heating system could adequately support. Pregnant women, infants, elderly individuals, and anyone showing signs of cold-related illness receive priority access to communal warming, while healthy adults contribute their own body heat and labor to maintain the collective thermal system. But the most remarkable aspect of community heat sharing was how it created temporary family units that strengthen village social bonds essential for year-round survival cooperation. Children from different households sleep together in carefully supervised arrangements, while adults share intimate survival responsibilities that build trust and mutual obligation networks extending far beyond winter heating assistance. The evening preparation ritual reveals the complex coordination required to transform individual cottages into effective group survival shelters. Multiple families contribute heating stones, extra blankets, food supplies, and even livestock that will provide additional warmth while being protected from outdoor conditions that could kill valuable animals essential for community economic survival. Medieval village records document the effectiveness of thermal rotation systems during extreme weather events, showing dramatically improved survival rates in communities that develop sophisticated heat-sharing networks compared to settlements where families attempted individual winter survival without collective thermal support. During the devastating winter of 1348, villages with established rotation systems lost fewer residents to cold exposure than communities without organized thermal sharing. The social dynamics of communal warming create unique community experiences that reveal how extreme survival situations could both challenge and strengthen medieval social structures. Normal household privacy disappears when 8 families crowd into Martha's cottage, but the shared vulnerability creates bonding experiences that enhance village cooperation during less extreme survival challenges throughout the rest of the winter. But community thermal rotation wasn't just emergency response, it was sophisticated resource optimization that maximized the survival value of limited heating materials by concentrating thermal efforts rather than spreading them ineffectively across individual households that couldn't maintain adequate temperatures alone. Villages could keep more people alive by pooling heating resources than by allowing families to struggle independently with insufficient thermal capacity. Medieval communities also developed specific protocols for managing the social tensions that could arise when thermal rotation decisions determined who received life-saving warmth versus who remained in potentially dangerous individual heating situations. Village leadership had to balance practical thermal capacity with social equity concerns that could create conflicts threatening community unity, essential for collective survival. The morning transition routines reveal how communities manage the return to individual household thermal systems after nights of collective warming. Families assess whether outdoor conditions allow safe return to individual cottages, while also evaluating whether community members need extended thermal support before risking exposure to their own potentially inadequate heating systems. Medieval thermal rotation systems incorporated specific training programs that taught community members how to participate effectively in collective warming arrangements while maintaining appropriate social conduct and contributing valuable skills to group survival efforts. Children learned to sleep quietly in crowded conditions, while adults developed expertise in fire management, thermal assessment, and emergency medical care that benefited entire communities. But perhaps the most important aspect of community heat networks was how they created social insurance systems that ensured village members would receive survival support during individual thermal emergencies in exchange for contributing to collective thermal resources when they had adequate heating capacity to share with more vulnerable community members. The religious and cultural aspects of thermal rotation reveal how medieval communities integrated spiritual practices with practical survival activities, using communal warming occasions for shared prayers, storytelling, and cultural transmission activities that strengthened village identity while providing psychological comfort during survival stress. Medieval communities that mastered thermal rotation systems often developed reputations that attracted additional residents during winter months, creating population dynamics where successful thermal management became competitive advantages that enhanced village economic and social development during non-winter periods, when survival cooperation translated into increased productivity and community prosperity. You settle into Martha's crowded cottage alongside 8 families who have temporarily become one extended household united by shared thermal necessity, feeling the remarkable warmth created when community cooperation transforms individual heating resources into collective survival systems that keep everyone alive through ancient principles of mutual aid that recognize winter as too dangerous to face alone. As you settle into your own comfortable bed tonight, surrounded by central heating and electric blankets, remember the Fletcher family and countless others who survived winter through nothing but human warmth, community cooperation, and the profound understanding that staying alive sometimes requires abandoning modern concepts of privacy and individual comfort in favor of shared survival that turns families into heating systems and communities into networks of mutual thermal support. The wind outside your modern home might be cold, but it carries with it the whispers of medieval voices who learned that winter's greatest lesson isn't about conquering cold. It's about discovering that human connection, literally and figuratively, provides the warmth necessary not just for comfort, but for the continuation of life itself. in learning to share heat. Medieval families learned to share survival, creating bonds stronger than blood that turned the simple act of sleeping together into the ancient art of keeping each other alive. Perhaps there's something we've lost in our climate-controlled world, something about the profound intimacy that comes from depending entirely on each other's warmth to survive the night. Medieval families knew each other's breathing patterns, body temperatures and thermal needs, with an intimacy that modern families sleeping in separate rooms with individual thermostats can hardly imagine. They understood that survival was never an individual achievement, it was always collective, always dependent on the willingness to share not just resources, but the very heat of their bodies. Tonight, as you drift off in your heated bedroom, consider the remarkable human capacity for adaptation and cooperation that allowed our ancestors to survive conditions that would kill most modern people within hours. They transformed the basic human need for warmth into sophisticated survival systems that required trust coordination and the kind of selfless cooperation that modern society struggles to maintain even in far less desperate circumstances. The medieval understanding that warmth shared multiplies rather than diminishes speaks to something fundamental about human nature, that we're stronger together than apart, warmer together than alone, and that sometimes the most sophisticated technology is simply the willingness to hold each other through the darkness. In our age of individual heating and private sleeping spaces, we've gained comfort, but perhaps lost something essential about the human experience of interdependence and mutual care. And so the long winter nights finally yielded to spring mornings as they always had and always would, but carrying with them the knowledge that warmth shared is warmth multiplied, and that sometimes the difference between life and death comes down to nothing more complicated than the willingness to hold someone close and breathe together through the darkness until dawn returns with its promise of another day survived, another night conquered, another spring earned through the simple miracle of human beings refusing to let each other freeze. Sleep well, knowing that your ancestors earned your comfort through centuries of nights, when staying warm meant staying alive, and staying alive meant never sleeping alone. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night,